everybody, and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today I'm going to be doing what's not really a continuation, but a similar video to one that I did about a year ago, which was about time travel. And today I'm going to be talking about games that have a very unique way of tracking and moving time forward. So by and large, I'm sure you're all aware that most games will do this by way of simply having like rounds. So everybody does whatever their round action is, and then we go to round 2 and round 3, etc., etc. And whether it's measured in years or generations or simply as rounds, it doesn't matter, but it's the same thing over and over, and you do it X number of times until everybody's done. Now, the thing is, there is nothing inherently bad about that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing that by any means, but it's nice to see a little bit of variety in the formula, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, that doesn't mean that these games don't necessarily play out similarly, but it means that at the end of each phase or round or whatever you want to call it, something unique changes based off of either what round it is or what everybody did or something along those lines. So with that, I hope that you enjoy this video. As always, please leave any and all thoughts in the comments below, and we're going to get started with my number 5. Number 5 on this list is actually the only game that shares a spot with the previous video that I did about a year ago. And this one is really about advancing technology by traveling through time. The game itself is Legacy Gears of Time. In this game, the idea is that we are all playing as sort of like time helpers, time agents, I don't know exactly what you call them, but the idea is that you are gradually traveling back in time and inventing different things. So for example, you can go all the way back and say that fire was invented in age X, you know, whatever it happens to be, that kind of thing. So the thing with progressing of time in this is that after everybody has gone, what ends up happening is time as a whole moves forward. So you literally have a new age of time that you are able to add inventions onto. And it's really interesting because the way that this works is the very first age, the age that is farthest away in time, has the most number of technologies that you can have because it's the farthest away. And the idea is that as you go farther and farther forward in time, going progressively through the rounds, then you add more technologies to each one, and you're able to increase the number each time. It's really, really interesting, and you can do a lot of stuff where you can sort of like subvert people, where you can force some invention to be created earlier than it was before, and stuff along those lines. So really the time travel aspect to this is also very integral to the time mechanic and the progressive mechanic to it. And that's really why it's lowest on the list, is simply because it's time travel, and that makes the time aspect unique. But it's still a really fun game, and it makes each round a little bit different in that sense, where yes, every game has strategic decisions every round, but in this game you really alter it even though you're looking at the same board. You are significantly altering what it is that you're going to be doing throughout each and every round. So, Legacy Gears of Time, my number 5. At number 4, I've got one of only a couple of games on this list that I do not own. This particular one is a worker placement game that I believe started out on Kickstarter, if I'm not mistaken. It is Viticulture. Viticulture is a game that is all about winemaking, and the interesting thing about this in terms of how the time aspect works is after you harvest the grapes and you smash them down and you make the wine, then the wine actually gets better throughout the different rounds. So it does have that very structured round thing going where you've got in this case you have different seasons, and then it goes through multiple years is the idea behind it. But as you are going through that progression, then you've got your wine sort of sitting in barrels and aging, and it becomes better quality and it becomes better wine and all this kind of stuff. And it's really cool. I really enjoy that aspect because that is something that winemakers do. You have to let it sit so that it gets better and better quality. quality. And the idea is that you're going to be buying seeds, you're going to be harvesting your grapes, you're going to be actually making your wines and essentially fulfilling wine orders. So orders might be for, relatively low quality wine or relatively high quality wines. And depending on what they are, then you're going to have your little tokens just moving forward gradually as they become better and better and better aged. Now, again, this is a little bit lower on the list simply because it is a relatively minor aspect. It's not superbly minor because it is still a big deal within the game to age up the wine, but the fact is that you still do have a very, very rigorous, very structured round by round aspect going on with it. Now again, most of the games on this list and pretty much all games in general will have that type of thing, but at the same time, moving your little things is fun, and it's like, oh cool, we're aging and we're getting better and better, but that's why it's lower on the list. Either way, Viticulture is my number 4. At number 3, I have a war game that actually works through itself in phases. One of the best things that I love about the game is its historical accuracy, and I've talked about it many, many times in that context, as well as just in general context about how much I enjoy the game itself. It is Twilight Struggle. In this game, you are recreating the Cold War, and the really interesting thing as far as timing is concerned with this is that you have 3 main phases. So you are doing round by round by round, as is tradition, and essentially once you get to a certain point, then you stop with what are called early war, and then you go into mid-war, and then you go into late war. And the really cool thing about this is several aspects. First off, the historical aspect, where during the early war, it encompasses specific years. During the Cold War, same thing for the mid and the late year, right? The second really interesting thing about it is, again, the historical accuracy of it creates a very specific type of strategy that you have to change up. So for example, during the mid-war is when the Russians, the communists, really start to go into South America. And the thing is that if you know that as a player, then you can sort of start building up yourself gradually in South America during the early war so that you're in a better position during the mid-war. By the same token, certain areas of the map will only score once certain parts are reached, once a certain time during the war is reached. So it's just really, really interesting. I love the historical aspect to it, and again, it's something that is very, very integral to the game because it drastically affects what you are able to do, and more importantly, when you are able to do it. So it is tremendously fun. It's a great game in general. I've only played it through a handful of times because it is very big and pretty complex, but the timing aspect, while on its surface, with regard to a single round, you're talking about you have your cards and you play one card at a time back and forth until everybody's out, and then you move on to the next round. So in that sense, very, very standard, again, just like all the games here, but the fact that you change up the cards entirely, the different abilities that you have, where they are taking effect, all of that kind of stuff, makes for Twilight Struggle to have a very interesting time progression as the game goes forward. And that is why it is my number 3. At number 2, I've got the other game on this list that I unfortunately do not own, but it is one I've talked a little bit about in this same context, and I've also talked about its video game predecessor, Civilization. In Civilization, the thing I really love about the timing aspect is how the units function. For those of you who haven't played Civilization, whether the board game or the video game, the idea is that as you yourself get new technologies and you're able to move forward in time spans. So you start off like in the Stone Age, and then you go through and through and through. So you go through the Bronze Age and all that kind of stuff. I don't know the exact ages, but the idea being that if you have a military unit, for example, then as you get better technologies, you are able to upgrade them. In the video game, all you do is you just click the upgrade button. But in the game, it's really neat because you have these little discs that you rotate around, and depending on which way it's facing will indicate what type of unit that is. So for example, you go from a musketman to a rifleman, and the rifleman is much more powerful because, let's face it, rifles are far better than muskets, right? And I really appreciate that, not only in the sense of technological advances, but the fact that you can see on the board as it's happening. Again, you do have this round-based gameplay, which again, it's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But the way that it's utilized by the game in terms of moving you through these different ages of technological advancement is really exciting, and I absolutely love it. And I love the way that Civilization handles it. Another game that does it very similarly is Progress. I don't know if you can see it, but I've got it on the shelf. There it is. It's right there. So Progress works in a relatively similar way to Civilization as well. The difference being that I prefer Civilization just in terms of having the single marker for your units and just being able to rotate it whenever you do your advancements so that you know what they are at the time. So that is why Civilization is my number 2. At number 1, I've got a game which I have talked about in this exact context quite a few times, and in addition, it was one of my first board game review and gameplay demo videos that I did oh so long ago. The game itself is Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar. In this game, the idea is that you are doing a worker placement. It's a worker placement game. You put your little guy on, and then several rounds later, or one round later, however long it is, then you take the person off and you get whatever it is that they are at. Very simple, right? Again, we do have the round-by-round mechanic, but for this video, the purpose of this is the way that time progresses. It is so cool. In this game, the whole point is that it's a game about a calendar, and the way that it works is you have like the physical gear, a physical calendar in the middle of the board that you are rotating at the end of every round. When you rotate it, all of the individual gears, so there, I believe it's 5 gears that surround the main central gear, then each one will rotate all of the pieces on that gear forward by 1 space. And it's just so cool to see because you can really see actual progression after every single round. Ordinarily, when you do this round by round stuff, then it just feels like, I mean, yeah, you're building off of what you did before, but at the same time, it might not really feel like, it's something different and unique and that kind of thing. Whereas with Tzolk'in, you actually physically see your progress move forward, or in this case, around in a slight arc. But the point is that you see that, you witness it firsthand with your eyeballs, and it's so cool, and I absolutely love how the game does it. In addition, on the main central wheel, it has several marked spaces which indicate the halfway point as well as the end point of the game. And again, because it's based off the Mayan calendar, which, we all had like, oh no, the 2012, whoa! All that kind of stuff. Oh, it's so scary, right? But it's a very cool mechanic. I love how they pulled it off. And again, even though we've got this very basic, very simple round by round sort of progression of play, the way that you actually progress the time is really cool. You're not just moving your little cube, you're not, just taking like a card away or whatever it happens to be, but you physically rotate this giant calendar, and then you're having to plan ahead because you're like, okay, well in 2 turns I'm going to be in this spot, so I want to make sure that I'm able to take that person off, and I've got so many people left, I can put them on, all this kind of stuff. So it creates very unique strategic decisions because, again, you can literally see where your pieces are going to be, when they're going to be there, and what you need to do in order to plan for it ahead of time. Absolutely amazing, very fun mechanic. Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar, my number 1 game for time progression. So that's it for me, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 5 favorite games that progress time in a unique way. Now, this is something that is a relatively niche thing, and it's very much open to interpretation. So, for example, you've got a game like Kingsburg, where at the end of each round, then you get a new bad guy. So something is changing, you know, and you have this, that, and the other. You've got a lot of politics going on with a lot of different games, and so even something, for example, like Power Grid, where depending on where you are in the game, you will be restocking your resources in a different way. All sorts of different stuff like that. So I'm very curious, what do you guys think about this particular category? Is it something that you don't really care about? Do you not really bother with wanting to see something fairly unique happen at the end of each round, and you're just perfectly fine with having your little cube or your circle, whatever it is, move around until the game ends? I'm very curious. I want to know what you guys think, as always, particularly because this is something that's really burned into our brains as how games function. We all have this type of thing in any game. But with that, thank you so very much again for watching. Please leave any and all thoughts in the comments below. You know I love to hear from you guys about all this kind of stuff. Do be sure to check out my social media stuff. We've got Twitter and we've got my new Facebook, so you can see all sorts of cool new stuff, including when I live stream video games, as well as when I post new videos, and I also put up fun articles and pictures and all sorts of neat stuff like that. So with that, thank you so very much for being here once again, and I will see you next time.
Thank you so much again, everybody, for watching my video on my favorite ways that time progresses in board games. Again, this is kind of a weird sort of category because you can obviously make the argument that any game is going to have that basic round by round or phase by phase progression or whatever it is, but what is it about it that makes it unique and fun and different? That's what I want to know, and that's what I want to hear from you guys, what your personal favorites are on this. As I mentioned, please let me know in the comments below, and anything and everything else that you'd like to share as well. As always, I've also got several of my playlists linked up at the top of the page so that you can see more of my work, and if you want, you can click on that big giant subscribe button so that you can see more of me in the future. Thank you very much again for watching, and I will see you next time.